What's up, everybody? This is Bill Mack here, and looks like I'm making another video again for you all here. I was want to talk a little bit about things, from time to time, about subjects that mean a lot to me, that I think of a lot of times, and just figured why not just go ahead and make videos about it and talk about it. So a thing that come to mind today is I was discussing with a friend of mine. We had been talking over the past few days. Something that was that I enjoyed watching as a kid on up into an adult now was wrestling. I mean, what guy doesn't like wrestling? I mean, it's got all kinds of things in it. Action, it's got storylines, it's got all kinds of things that would attract the male audience. And with the Flash and everything that's going on today, it's just awesome. I mean, I've loved it ever since I've been a kid. But today is kind of a little bit closer than that. There was a wrestling company called World Championship Wrestling, and it used to go on Monday nights and head to head with WWE, which is World Wrestling Entertainment. Now, I'm an old school NWA, WCW guy, and my friend Brandon, which you'll see his video, is a hardcore WWE fan. Well, a few years ago, maybe 15 years, almost 20 years ago, WCW used to compete with WWE, what is now termed as the Monday Night Wars. Okay, it was these two rival companies that went head to head each and every single Monday night, and they tried to outdo each other, to attract the most audience, to get the higher ratings, and it turned out that this whole big Monday Night Wars thing that lasted over quite a few years. Sadly to say to me is that, unfortunately, this time I was on the losing side, which is WCW. They eventually sold out to World Wrestling Entertainment and the wrestlers and everything else. But I'm going to go back a little bit before that. Back when I was younger, being a kid, I loved watching NWA. It was a division of WCW. And it was just so great, watching the old school matches, the promos, everything, it might have been a little bit cheesy, but it looked realistic, And what was, to me, was one of my favorites was the promos, because, hey, you could watch the promos and it would it would have you glued to your television. You're just sitting there and listening to it, and it seems so real. As if you look in wrestling today, they've kind of blatantly said, hey, we're not real, we're sports entertainment, and it's all about the entertainment and less about wrestling now. Which, I understand that you have to have storyline to build up, but not too much entertainment, more or less stories to build the matches. Well, WCW back then was awesome. I mean, they had some great promo guys. They had Ric Flair, Sting. They had the Road Warriors. They had tag teams, the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express. They had these story rivals, the Four Horsemen. They had all these great talkers and these great matches, and it looked so realistic. It looked like you would have to wonder, geez, is that real? Are they going to be back? Because the attacks, the matches, all these things, it just looked real. And it drew you in. But anyway, back in the late 80s to 90s is when the NWA WCW first appeared. And, I kind of watched it and it kind of grew on me, I mean, sure, I'd seen WWE, which was WWF at the time. But, I kind of watched a little bit, but more of WCW was what attracted to me. I mean, it was the matches to me. They had this match, which I have not myself seen it replicated, but it was like a scaffold match. It was so awesome. I mean, anybody knows what scaffolds are. Imagine scaffolds at least, 100, 200 feet high above the ring. And the only way that the person won, or the tag team won, was that they got thrown off the scaffold and landed in the ring. Now, mind you, these things weren't very wide. You imagine two teams up on top of that scaffold, high as it was in the air, trying to have a wrestling match without fear of losing footing and possibly falling and getting hurt. Well, that was the thing about it to me, was it intrigued me to doing that, and these feuds that they had, they looked real, and they gave them real. I mean, one of my favorite singles competitors was Magnum TA. And I remember one time he and Dusty Rhodes were a tag team. And they tagged against Ole Anderson and Arn Anderson, part of the Four Horsemen, which they were two brothers that were called the Minnesota Wrecking Crew. And they jumped Magnum TA in the background and in the back, you know, when he was getting ready for his match. And it's like, you wondered, wow, does this guy really get beat? Is he really hurt? Is he really bleeding, you know? I mean, was this stuff real? Because it looked real. I mean, you know, they don't make it as blatantly like that then as they do today. But I'm not trying to ramble on too much, you know, about that though. But, you know, I was a big WCW supporter. You know, I pulled for them over the years. That was what I enjoyed, you know. And sometimes I would go over to WWE and see, you know, what was going on and whatnot. But, you know, as a casual fan, not someone, you know, that I was already pulling for WCW at the time. But it was so great. And I would notice that when WCW first came on, it was like they had like Saturday nights, you know, WWE Saturday night that would come on, but there was really nothing going on Mondays. Well, then I noticed, you know, somewhere in the mid to late 90s, Eric Bischoff was hired, you know, to take, you know, them, and he was the executive vice president, but he was in charge of kind of making them from going from an NWA regional brand and making them going, you know, nationwide, you know, where it would be a big challenge, because at the time WWE was the only really big thing in town. You know, Vince McMahon, you know, had taken his dad's company and made it, you know, nationwide. It was no longer just a northern wrestling company. So, you know, it was kind of cool with Bischoff, because in the beginning he was giving these great ideas, you know, with these things. And one of the biggest all-time ideas that I feel like he gave was with the NWO. That was the most awesome idea, I think, or gimmick that I've ever seen a wrestling company have. And on top of that, now get this, on top of that, they took Hulk Hogan, which had been a staple face for years. I mean, a face for years, back when he was even in WWE, which I will get to that too. But they took him and they turned him heel into Hollywood Hogan. And then he went against everything he had always stood for. Made the fans hated the NWO. And they were supposedly this group to come in and invade WCW to take them over. Well, the storyline in that was really good, you know. And it was in the beginning, I will say. It was really, really good. It had Hogan, Hall, and Nash, just three. Well, I think what happened was Vince must have been looking at them and seeing what they were trying to do, because they started going head to head on Monday nights with Vince on Monday Night Raw. And so Vince, you know, and when a national competition happens, you're going to have one person is going to try to do something outrageous or something, you know, that you wouldn't expect to draw that audience back. And then in reflex, that other company is going to do the same thing. Well, you know, Vince saw that, and then he brought on the DX, which is D-Generation X, with Triple H and X-Pac and Shawn Michaels and Chyna, you know, and they formed, which I thought was good for both companies. But, you know, when it come to that group against the grain, to me, it was the NWO when they came in. But going back to Hogan, you know, they turned him full-fledged heel, and the NWO ran shot over everybody. You know, if you weren't with them, you were against them. Well, you know, Vince was seeing this, and Vince started doing his own thing. And what happened was, you know, they started doing their own thing, and then WCW and Eric Bischoff would see that, and then he would go and try to do more outlandish things. Now, here's what he had an idea in the beginning, and how to be able to make WCW from regional to national. WCW was owned by Ted Turner, which owned TBS and TNT. Well, he was a billionaire. He had all kinds of money. And he gave Bischoff the checkbook to, you know, try to get some stars, because Bischoff wanted to try to get these wrestlers contracts and give them more contracts and try to entice them to leave Vince's company to come to WCW and work for him and under Ted Turner. And that way, you know, you could try to tip the scale from having all these wrestlers that were old mainstays in WWE, have them come over to WCW and help them out, much like they did WWE. Now, in the beginning, I understand the idea. The only problem was that Vince basically, or not Vince, but excuse me, Eric Bischoff basically, when he bought just about most of the wrestlers, it caused Vince this change in Vince that he had to end up doing something. I mean, every one of his top guys was going to basically, hold on just a minute. Sorry about that, I got interrupted there. But what Vince had to do was he had to go back and he had somehow build up, I mean, his ranks, because all these guys, Macho Man, Hogan, so many of them come over there back to WCW because Bischoff was spending money right and left to get these guys. Well, it was just interesting that strategy worked, because in hindsight now, looking at it, Bischoff was actually doing him a favor by doing that, because they had no choice but to use their own talents and push them, the younger guys. Well, in hand where Bischoff's idea was great at the beginning, the problem was happening during the middle to end. By having so many guys like Hogan, Hall, Nash, Macho Man, Mr. Perfect, Rick Rude, all these guys over, it was more or less, they were the star power. And they in Toad did not allow WCW to do what their rival was doing, which was raise their talent, their young talent up, give them a push and grow them. They didn't do that. And so what to me it ended up being was Nash and Hall and them started taking over, and they started becoming bookers and booking the matches the way they wanted to do it. I think the one big superstar, if nothing else, that came out of the era were Bischoff and even Vince Russo. And Russo was a writer during the Attitude Era, which is what they called it. He left WWE and came over to WCW to help them out so that they could try to get edge, because when you're doing things, sometimes you need, I would say, bumps and help. Trying to give them the help and give them some more creative ideas. But Russo stuff didn't fit in quite well with WCW. And why? Why it did not work? Because when one thinks about it, Vince on WWE was on USA. USA was a channel that didn't have restrictions to it. But Ted Turner, which was on both TNT, TBS, they were more superstation channels, which in hand were more family friendly. So they couldn't go and do the risque things that length which WWE was doing at the time. So whenever you see one company has that advantage in doing that, they're going to exploit that. And that's what they did. They pushed the envelope, WWE did, and leaving WCW to where it was basically stale. It became stale. And me as a fan, it was great during the popularity when they had guys like Jeff Jarrett and the NWO storylines, the NWO Wolfpack storylines. But then they kind of get stale, And to me as a fan and growing up watching these guys, I don't know, it didn't make me happy at all. So I sat there and would watch it on Mondays, and I'm like, what am I watching here? Hogan is fighting Billy Kidman and losing to Billy Kidman. These young guys that they weren't properly pushing. Russo just wanted them to run head over, and you just can't throw young guys. It takes time to build new talent over time, like Stone Cold was and like some of these other ones were. But in hand, I mean, they did what they had to do. And WCW, their storylines got stale. There was no organization, because once I bring back that point of each company with Bischoff running WCW and Vince running WWE, you give the hand and applaud Vince, because Vince cared about wrestling. He grew up with it. He watched it. His dad had the promotion. He has the promotion. He was hands-on with it. He knew how to do it. But Bischoff didn't have that. WCW did not have the organization like Vince did. So people were getting sick of WCW at that point. And when it started coming down is that Bischoff would have the announcers announce what was going to happen on Raw if you turn it over there. And by him doing that, unfortunately, yet again, another kick in the butt that they did to themselves, it caused WWE, excuse me, to start the tide started turning in their direction. So WCW in the past 2 years was winning the Monday Night Wars and the ratings. They were winning for 2 years straight. But it all come down to this particular point in time, and then after that they started getting edgier, and WCW started getting staler and staler and staler. So after a while, it come down to this basically. They were trying. Ted Turner is merged. Time Warner merged with AOL, and it caused Ted to sell TBS and TNT. They were no longer his company, his channels, and hence the new companies didn't want wrestling on their channel. So instead of them showing that they cared enough to get a good deal for WCW, all they did was got a cheap deal from Vince. Vince had them a cheap deal instead of Bischoff, which Bischoff, remembering Bischoff was trying to get a deal together, but it just never worked out. So if you see the problems and things that happened, Vince ended up in the end buying WCW. And of course Vince is going to do what Vince done, and he crashed WCW. They had this fake little invasion that happened over like 3 pay-per-views that really sucked, because you know why? Well, Time Warner was still paying some of these contracts out. So the wrestlers couldn't wrestle while the contracts were being paid. But those that took the buyouts went over to WWE. But, you know, the only one that went over that was even decent was Booker T. He was the WCW champion going into it. But you had all these other guys that were mid-card to no talent that went over there at this whole invasion angle. It failed. It failed, and they ended up burying WCW. So, you know, as a WCW fan, it was heartbreaking, because I was hoping they would start another channel, or at least do well with WCW and put them on a different channel, or just something for WCW fans to watch. But all in all with it, they couldn't do it, and they buried WCW. And then through the years, when their contracts come out, these guys would come up. Goldberg, the NWO, all these other guys would come and make appearances and be there. But of course, again, it's WWE, and they're going to bury WCW any way they can, and that's just how they did. But and just to mention this last bit of information here before I sign off with my video is they brought Sting in, made this big deal with Sting. Now, granted, Sting was the icon. Sting was the last holdover from the old WCW group. He never went over to WWE like everybody else did. He stayed away from them. Granted, he was in TNA, but he didn't go back to WWE. Well, they went to WrestleMania, and unfortunately, Sting went ahead and signed with them. He wanted, at least to fight at least 1 or 2 more matches before he called it a career. Well, I thought it was cool to bring him in, like they needed another breath of fresh air, because, it's, in my opinion, Raw and SmackDown really suck right now. And so, they made this big deal with Sting, and then the pay-per-view event came up. Me and Bullet B, Brandon, which is my Team B best friend, he and I watched WrestleMania, and the match between Triple H turning into a WCW versus WWE thing, which really it wasn't. I mean, this is 2015, that was 2001, 14 years ago. And Sting was like, no, it's not about WCW, and WWE, it's about me shutting you up. So what they did was they had the match, which was a decent, C plus B match. And they took the gimmicks of the NWO, and they had Hulk Hogan, Hall and Nash come out there, as old as they were, oh, help me to the ring, brother. I need help to the ring, and all them gray beards and everything, trying to go out there. And then you had, oh, you didn't know? You better call somebody. Road Dogg, Jesse James, Billy Gunn, X-Pac, and then it was like a DX versus NWO match on the outside, while Sting and Triple H were fighting on the inside, which was, I guess, me and Brandon was talking, and I guess that kind of helped it a little bit, but I think they're like 14 years too late in doing that. Catch them in their prime, then do that. But all in all, Sting, unfortunately, the only match he ever had in the ring, he lost it. So it's saddened me, and they've really not brought it up again. And which, that's Vince for you. So in the end, WCW, a big fan. I had to concede to WWE, and that's what's on here now. Not TNA. TNA really sucks. I've tried to watch it, and I just cannot get into it. But the fault is in the booking. It was in allowing these older guys to run it instead of having proper creative control and proper direction it was going. And just a lot of people just didn't like it. And it's hard to hear that, but that's the truth, is people just got tired of WCW, where you didn't know what was going on from one minute to the other. That's been the big knock with them. But that's really all that can happen, and all that happened leading up to that. So when you have disorganization, whenever you have lack of direction, things like that are going to happen, and you're not going to last very long. So, and so that was my depict of the Monday Night Wars, and going back and giving a brief description of WCW. So this is my first video, at this link. So I hope you all enjoy, and if you do, comment on it if you can, like it and favorite it, and I appreciate all of your time. So until next time, everyone take care. Bill Mack signing out.